Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Tomorrow's Ummah podcast, where youth from the West discuss issues of today, along with Islamic history and how we can develop forward as Muslims. Today, I am joined with Dr. Abdullah Al-Qadri and my dear friend Ata Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's very nice having new faces with us every other week. As we're recording this today, we have put together a discussion that required quite a bit of research for some of us, and looking into a part of our history that we can really look to and learn from. I am speaking about the medieval era, the era of, as some would say, medieval Islam or medieval Christianity. But this era brought forth many strong figures that we can learn from, and many strong figures that we can refer to strengthen our iman, to strengthen our faith, to remind us to be humble and pious, and particularly one that said, I would rather be remembered for my humility and devotion to Islam than for my conquest and victories. I'm referring to none other than Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi rahimahullah, a man whose legacy we remember in every single era till today and that we can learn from. Let's start with setting the scene. And I think we can start by talking about his vision, his upbringing, what were his influences on his upbringing. And obviously we will get to the juicy stuff as well, the main conquest of Jerusalem and what learnings we can take from that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting time, certainly. I mean, if you compare it to today's time, it was nothing what the Islamic world was like. Islam was a superpower, and it wasn't just one superpower. Keep in mind, at that time, there were two Khalifas. One belonged to the Fatimid dynasty, which included and controlled most of Egypt and the Western Hemisphere on that side.
Yep.
And then the Abbasid dynasty. And the Khilafat, which was Syria, Aleppo, Jordan, and Palestine. And obviously, 40 years before the birth of Salahuddin Ayubbi came the first Crusades.
Yep.
And obviously we all know, mashallah and alhamdulillah, the Battle of Quds, conquest of Jerusalem, was first done by our wonderful second Caliph, Hazrat Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, came, who conquered, and he liberated CE, yeah. So, and after that, it was in the control of Muslims for what, 400 years or so?
Yeah.
Right? And then after the 400 years are up, the Crusades come in. Keep in mind, Muslims are, again, a superpower. They're a power to be dealt with. And we'll get into this, we'll touch into this, but because of the infighting, many of the political turmoil, many of the Muslim leaders at that time actually reached out to the Crusaders when they began to try and use them to undermine their friends, their rivals, who also happened to be Muslims, for their own personal gain.
Which is quite crazy. They would approach different kings of their time, different people of different cities, kings of Jerusalem, and when after the first crusade and second, and then later on 8 crusades total.
Yep.
I think I want to backpedal a little. 638 CE, Hazrat Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he did, we had the first conquest of Jerusalem, we say. Saying a conquest is true, but it was such a unique conquest that falls into line with how we Muslims view, taking control and bringing peace to a society. He brought the Pact of Umar, or some people say the Umayyad convent, or there's different words for it. It's basically the
first Jerusalem pact, or whatever you want to call it.
It is, or constitution, some people might say, which guarantee the protection of the Christians and their holy sites, so the Holy Church of Sepulchre, and along with that ensured the rights of worshiping, property rights to all the Christians as well in that area, which is, I think some people don't know this, right? We're talking about the early stages of Islam, like way before the Abbasids, the
Umayyads, and all
that, all of these different dynasties and empires. I'm talking like the Khulafa Rashidin, the rightly guided ones. They brought this forward in the hub of religions, of the religious world, was this idea of peaceful unity. Right. And that's something that we still today, people can't fathom. Right. And I
mean, I think in an ideal world, people want to achieve it. But unfortunately, just like it happened a couple thousand years ago now, personal gain comes in the way of this idyllic, unified, unity, global peace situation that everyone wants, but it's the personal kind of vendettas and agendas that people have. And I think we'll discuss some of the stories, I'm sure, in and around with Salahuddin Ayubbi, which help to groom him and help him understand the state of the ummah.
100%.
And Salahuddin Ayubbi, and I think it's really interesting to note, was a very different kind of leader compared to Umar ibn al-Khattab. While at the same time, there were very stark comparisons you can draw. These guys were humble.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing about Salahuddin Ayubbi, compared to all of the Fatimids, the Abbasids, even Nuruddin Zingi, who was his master, who was his, teacher for most of the time, compared to Salahuddin Ayubbi, the modesty of Salahuddin could not be touched. A man who would not enter his own palace saying, "This is too much for me. This tent outside
is more than enough."
That's it.
It's more than enough. Definitely.
I mean, let's talk about some of those values. Like, what values do you find that we can take direct
So,
reference to?
few key points that I took in from Salahuddin Ayubbi. His character, his humbleness. A lot of Muslim leaders nowadays have too much pride. Right? They have too much, fame. The fame takes over them. But as in Salahuddin
And fame was a different game back then, right? Oh, yeah. Fame is a different game now too, but back then
it was different.
We're talking about empires run from people by singular people, right?
Well, I think fame back then was a lot harder to achieve than now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, with media, every person becomes a celebrity.
You can achieve fame like this,
100%.
But and I'm sure you have social media examples that come to your mind right away. Like, why is this guy famous? At that time, you had to be someone who did something, or be the son of someone who is doing something to be able to achieve that level of fame, or a scientist, or someone of very high caliber. And these guys were like the cream of the crop. Nuruddin Zingi was one of them. Salahuddin Ayubbi, he was from one of those families, the Ayyubids. They were one of those families who were tied in with the Nuruddin Zingis and his father. They were all tied in together. But coming to Salahuddin Ayubbi, when he's born, his mother sees a dream, or as she's hamla with it, she's pregnant with Salahuddin Ayubbi rahmatullah alayh, she sees a dream. And in that dream, she sees herself picking up a sword from the swords of Allah. What a dream to see.
Subhanallah.
What a dream to see. There's some ulama I've listened to in the past. I border on caution here, but I get what they're trying to say. When they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to bring Salahuddin al-Ayubbi at that time instead of the Battle of Badr or Uhud or with Khalid ibn Walid, because he saw that kind of individual was needed at that time to be able to unify the Muslims.
Yeah, and the Muslims from the 7th to 10th, century, they were ruling the world, right?
They were superpower.
They were the superpower.
Yeah.
And at the time, so there are certain groups that, like the Vikings, for example, in the turn of the 11th century, who became, they became Christian, right? And so their loyalty to a certain faith then brought a turn of power. There was a lot of disunity that then came at that time too. And because of that, we saw, the turn of an era, right? The 11th century brought a completely different era. Right. And now we're talking about anarchy going left and right, disunity in politics. And that brought about the Crusades, right? And when we talk about the Crusades, we're talking...
Well, the Crusades really came up because the people began to look at Palestine, Palestine, and the area, Syria, Turkey, Egypt, and they saw the amount of turmoil that existed between all of them.
Yeah.
Between the Muslims. And they're like, wait a second, if we want to go and grab something, time is now. Christians were unified.
Yeah, they're very
Undoubtedly, they were unified. And what it allowed them to see is the Abbasids are fighting the Fatimids. Egypt is going after Syria. Syria is going after Palestine.
But the Christians did have conflict, though. They were fighting between state and church.
But they were able to put it all
aside
for a greater cause.
And I think some even historians say that to avoid civil conflict, the Crusades also began at that time.
You could make that argument, certainly. And perhaps the church played a very interesting political card. to be able to play that, but they did they played a very nice move at a very good time, and we can look at it in history in retrospect and say that was a damn good political move by them.
Yeah, and so let's talk about cities they established. They established Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, Jerusalem, and Galilee.
Yep.
So
and these are very important
very
for later on in the story, yeah.
Because we're going to be talking about the establishment of the Zangis, which brought about the vision given to Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah. Now, there was a bloodbath in Jerusalem at that time.
When the first Crusades came up.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the stories, if you read the historians, apparently if you entered into any courtyard, they would be up to their knees in blood.
Yeah, so historians, modern accounts, I'm not talking about, the modern accounts say that 10,000 people slaughtered in just the Temple of Solomon, and knee deep, full of blood.
And babies thrown away, thrown literally with the ends of their feet against the walls.
And it's a bit ridiculous that some people now argue nowadays say that was the norm of conquering. And like,
I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that at all.
No.
People narrate that like, you take a castle, you slaughter. Like, where did this norm come from?
I mean, I understand the level. Slaughtering did take place. That was the medieval norm, but certainly not to the extent as to what the Christians did with the citizens of Palestine.
The Crusaders did.
The Crusaders did. There was no precedence of this before. The only precedence that you can make an argument for was when Genghis Khan. I can make a parallel in the level of torture and barbaric nature that occurred. But then what the Muslims did after, what Salahuddin after, that's where Salahuddin won hearts.
And this is interesting because when we're talking about, there was a dark era that came, right? Because of the slaughtering. There also, we pushed for an era of unity, right? That is the message of Islam. And that is the message of what Salahuddin...
So who pushed?
Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah, pushed the narrative of unity, right? He pushed that story in his time. And that's sort of what we're going to transition to, right? We just painted a picture of a dark era. Crusades just started. Muslims are falling from their legacy.
Yep, they're worried about their own personal gain. They're worried about their throne, our city, my Fatimid dynasty, his Abbasid dynasty, my Tripoli, my Damascus, my Damascus, my Alexandria. It's just all very me.
Yeah, and then the turn came during the time of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah.
Now you also have to remember that, and this is a fact in history. A lot of these so-called Muslims, drinking was very rampant amongst them. Yeah, amongst that time. Yeah. And one of the few people who didn't drink, Nuruddin Zingi. He did not drink. It was for people to see a ruler who doesn't drink wine.
It's probably really different to see, right? It was very different to see at that time.
Unbelievably different. And then all of a sudden, now he's the master of another. And some of the historians, if you ever hear them speak about Salahuddin, they keep using the word weird. He was a weird guy. He wasn't weird. He was just a God-fearing man.
That's what he was. And okay, so Nuruddin Zingi, he was casted from a mold. And what was that mold? That mold was his father.
Yep.
Right? Imamuddin Zingi. Now, Imamuddin Zingi was appointed as a governor of Mosul at the time, and
by the Abbasids.
And by the Seljuks, actually. Seljuks. Yep. The Seljuk Sultan had appointed him. Muslim Syria was an anarchy. Crusades began. He was then appointed as a ruler. He established the Zingi dynasty, and he then conquered his first fortress of the Crusaders. And there was a lot of back and forth, right? There's so many battles that we can talk about here. And I'm sure you've read about these battles too. And it's a lot of power play, like, capturing the right areas, capturing the right cities, strategic areas. The Crusades continued. His crowning victory, though, was Edessa. Edessa was a very unique place which drove a wedge, between the Muslim states. And conquering Edessa for Imamuddin Zingi was very crucial. And that's why people say it was a crowning victory, because it's equivalent of taking over like the most important fortress.
It wasn't the biggest fortress.
It definitely wasn't.
It was definitely the most strategic fortress one amongst that line from Syria into Palestine.
Exactly. And that drove a wedge through the land. Now, unfortunately, he was killed in his sleep and assassinated. But he had great contribution to not just the wars, but to his state. He had built an agricultural society. He fed his people. And actually, there's a quote that he says that I love a saddle better than a silken bed. And the din of battle.
Imam says this.
Imam ad-Din says this. And the din of battle better than the most enchanting music. The din of battle is like the war cries that happen during a battle. The clash of arms more than the most blandishment of a sweetheart.
Wow.
And like that was his character, was a man who, for his state, for his people, would fight for justice, for unity. And now that's the mold that we're now casting for his son, Nuruddin Zingi, right? There was two, after the passing of his father, the Zengi state got split into two, the Western and Eastern state. And he inherited the Western state, which is the capital of Aleppo. And the Crusaders at that time slaughtered the people of Edessa, because we talked about his father taking Edessa.
Yeah.
When his father passed away, obviously the Crusaders took the chance and they took it back. He came down in a fury. He took back the land of Edessa. And that's when the Pope started the Second Crusades. Now, we're really building a story here for Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, because now the Second Crusade start, right? Because Edessa has been taken back. It's now the Zengi dynasty has started. And it's really amazing how these dynasties are created, right? It's created by people of forbearance, people who had strength and wanted to hold together the Muslim people.
Be unified, right?
Be unified and give them that strength. And now Nuruddin Zengi, they had many back and forths, but the people had requested help of Nuruddin Zengi in Damascus. And in Damascus, he came and pushed back all the forces of the Crusaders back to Palestine, right? And that's the end of the Second Crusade. And there were so many back and forth of fights. Like, they kept on pushing, kept on coming back. They established the Crusader base in Ascalon. And this is when the 10-year treaty happened. And I know I'm going on a bit of tangent, but I want to give a historical background before we get into the juice of his character.
Definitely.
The 10-year treaty happened. And that's when Nuruddin came to Damascus. And this is where we now start the story of the family of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, right? And his the uncle of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, who is Shirku.
The one-eyed warrior.
The one-eyed warrior.
The one-eyed warrior, yeah.
Shirku.
And Shirku, I think before pre-production we were talking, Shirku literally translates Sher in Farsi, in Persian, is lion. Everyone knows Urdu, it's from Urdu. And Ku is part of a word or a nickname that you can give a mountain. So it translates roughly as either a mountain lion or a lion who stands on a mountain. So that name just obviously it invokes, yeah. And obviously, and he was, now keep in mind, this guy was, Shirku was a warrior through and through. Nuruddin Zengi was a ruler. Nuruddin Zengi, outwardly, he was thin, regal, elegant. Shirku was a jungju. Like, this guy was a warrior. One eye gone, belly a little out, rough, tough, but loyal to the grain. And loyalty at this time in Islam, in the Muslim Ummah, was few and far in between. Like, very brothers rare. Weren't loyal to each other.
No.
But Shirku was unbelievably loyal to both the father of Salahuddin Ayubbi and the father of Nuruddin Zengi.
Yeah.
They were like he was like the bodyguard of these two families, basically. Yeah. And they kept him together at all times.
Yeah, 100%. And so that Ascalon base that the Crusaders had established was a threat to Egypt and Damascus, right? Yeah. And so Egypt was under threat. And at that time, Shawar was the vizier of...
It's very important to understand what a vizier is. There are khalifas at this time, two of them. One is from the Fatimid dynasty, which controls Egypt and the Western. And then from the Sunni hemisphere is the Abbasids, which is Syria, Damascus, and Aleppo, and all of that. But the Khalifa wasn't someone who really did anything. It was a title. So if you want to understand it in today's term, one of the historians I once listened to compared it to like the Queen of England or the King of England. It's a title, but you don't really have any power. The person of power was the Vizier.
Yeah.
He ran the country.
The prime minister.
The prime minister. He ran the country. It's really interesting. Why then have why do you think that happens? If you have someone who runs the country, like prime ministers, presidents, dictators, whatever you want to call them, but then there's a level of monarchy above.
Like a commonwealth.
Why?
Yeah.
Have you guys ever given it any thought?
It's a lot of things. Like if you have, let's compare it. Like, what do you think? If you have like a queen above you as a country, like why do you need one?
You would need
unified front.
Unified front, yeah, exactly.
The Muslim state is together.
Exactly, and you would need some sort of guidance, of course.
And they would. It's interesting because that guidance part, like the Abbasids, they still held power in terms of putting different states under their flagship, sort of like how a commonwealth operates, right?
Interesting.
And from what I've learned, it holds that moral boundary for a lot of cases.
I think more important than a moral, because a moral boundary, especially in Islam, that's covered by, you can say, the judge or the imam. But in terms of the monarchy, and the reason the khilafat was there, almost like a kingship, was because there's a psychologist and a philosopher. His name is Gale, I believe. But he said all humans are monarchists by nature. We need someone to look up to.
Oh, really?
And so they made huge castles for these kings to say, damn, that's a king. And so our minds, the minds of the subjects, never went to tyranny. We can never reach that. There's already someone who occupies that. So what's the point of being a tyrant or causing tyranny? That place is already held. And so he was more of a placeholder to keep the ummah together. To that extent, certainly it was a moral boundary. But the Vizier was the one who ran the country. And the Khilafat usually didn't fall. If there was a Khalifa, he was there. And the Khalifa was happy eating, chilling, I hope praying. So he was there good with that, but the Vizier was the one who did all of the political ideologies, the political schemes, and the scenarios that were created.
The working with different states, mobilizing the army, sending out your army for different expeditions. So this was Shawar in Egypt.
Yes.
Now, we both look at each other and laugh about this because, quite honestly, the story of Shawar is very interesting. He was the one who identified a problem and then became a problem in the case.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. I never thought about that.
And so he requested help, right, from Nuruddin Zangi to bring an army, protect the people. And this is where he brought in Nuruddin Zangi. Now, Shawar, the vizier of Egypt, he requested that Nuruddin Zangi sends an army. Now, who does he send? He sends
he sent the army because the Crusades were coming in. Yeah. What was the name of the guy who's leading this crusade? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't really know.
The reason I bring it up is because this guy tried to conquer Egypt 5 times.
Oh.
He tried to conquer Egypt 5 times, and each of those times, unfortunately, he was not able to get it done.
We're not talking about Richard the Lion.
No. Richard the Lion came much later.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I forgot his name, but it'll come to me. But this guy tried to conquer Egypt in a span of 6 years, 5 times. And who was there? 5 of the 5 times? Shirku. And the reason Shirku, I think you're getting into that, please.
And Shirku was then sent on this expedition to protect, Egypt.
Do you know why?
On the call of Shawar.
But why? What did Shawar do? Because, understand, Nuruddin Zangi didn't need to get involved.
No. We really didn't.
He's there, whatever, Fatimids, but why? This is the I'm just trying to help the audience and everyone understand the political scheme at play.
Because he was sent a couple times. So the first time.
The first time is the most important.
Okay.
The reason it's most important because it lays a precedence. So first of all, Egypt is rich. Damascus, not so much. Egypt probably makes what it makes in a month. What Syria as a whole, the Sunni Khilafat as a whole, makes in a year. That's a rich land, Egypt. Rich culture. The Mediterranean Sea is right there. Easy access to Palestine.
Yeah.
Whoever has that port, the Cairo port, holds the key to Palestine as well.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is Vizier, what's his name? Sorry. The Vizier?
Shawar.
Shawar. He goes there to Nuruddin Zingi and he stays there for a little while. And he says, and he's actually been ousted. He's been ousted. So he goes to try and handle a coup to go back and recuperate and become the vizier again.
Request help.
Yeah. And so he says, if you help me win Egypt back, I'm going to give you 1/3 of everything Egypt earns in a year, every single year until my death. Nuruddin Zingi is like, 1/3? I don't even need to retake Jerusalem. I can buy Jerusalem with that much money. So he says, you know what, Shirkuh, go. Shirkuh, obviously being loyal as he is, he decides to go. Salahuddin Ayubbi, 20 years old, around approximately, late teens, early 20s. He says, uncle, I'm not going. Typical uncle fashion. If I say you're coming, you're coming. Now is the time for you to learn statesfare. Now is the time for you to learn war. Yeah. So Shirkuh says, let's go. This now sets the stage of Salahuddin beginning battles. So now they go. At the same time, what ends up happening? The Crusades are starting as well.
Yep.
So now both of these armies clash. Eventually what happens? There's a stalemate. But in that stalemate, this Wazir, I keep forgetting his name, Shawar. He's up there. So now Shawar, as he now is again the Wazir in Egypt, he goes to the Crusaders and he says, hey man, you see these Muslims?
I need your help.
Let's kick them out. And we can talk later.
And I know we're laughing about it, but like this is the type of game they were playing, right? Like,
and obviously when the game is being played, you don't know the game is being played. You're the one who's the game playing against.
Yeah.
So Shirkuh gets pushed and pushed and pushed until he's basically in I forget the city name. Basically he's in a small tight area and it's like 10-1 and he's going to be demolished. He's going to be absolutely demolished. And then Nuruddin Zingi, he sends an army to Jerusalem. Why? If Shirkuh dies, that's my guy. I can't have a whole army perish. So let me send an army to Jerusalem to remove people from the Crusades. To allow Nuruddin, to Shirkuh, to push back the Crusaders as well.
And that's where armies diverted. They made their comeback. Shawar took his place.
Well, no, what ended up happening here is when Shirkuh pushed back and need that Crusader's name. Anyways, the leader of the Crusades at that time, as he's being pushed back, they say, you know what? Let's go to a truce. The truce is what? You leave, I leave. Who's left in Egypt? Shawar.
And that's crazy considering that, he now promised Nuruddin Zingi what he promised, but where that deal went, poof.
Yep.
As far as we know, there may have been things that historians have accounted that we don't know. And then now we're talking about a second calling, right? Shirkuh was then called upon a second time to go help out Shawar, right? Or help out Egypt actually in this case. Now, the stubbornness of Shawar was shown, and that is when Shawar was, for a lack of other terms, taken out, and Shirkuh was brought in as the vizier of Egypt, right? He is now the man running Egypt. And this is the uncle of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah. He's become the vizier of Egypt. A few months later, he passes away, and this position goes to his nephew, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi. Now, like you said, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi has now witnessed a lot of things, and we'll continue what he's witnessed and what that led to after we just take a quick break. Now, unfortunately, the passing of Shirkuh.
Before we get to the passing of Shirkuh, the Crusader's name in that little thing, I was just looking at my phone, his name was Amalric I of Jerusalem.
Oh, now, okay.
You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So Amalric I, he sees that now Shirkuh has gone back to Syria. Wazir back is Shawar. Wait a second. Now's my time.
Now's my time.
So now Amalric goes, time for my second attempt. So he goes, by the way, who does he leave in Egypt? Who does Shirkuh leave in Egypt? Salahuddin Ayubbi.
Yep.
Chill here, kind of test out the waters. Don't do anything against Shawar. Don't do anything. Stay there. See what happens. Amalric goes, letter goes directly. And by the way, the pigeon system of the Muslims was by far a lot greater than the Crusaders. Crusaders was horseback. The Seljuks basically came down from that tradition. They had humming pigeons, who were homing pigeons, who were able to send. And that was basically a very slow version of an email. It was a lot quicker than horseback. So letter goes out. Instantly, Shirmu comes. Sorry, what's his name?
Shawar.
No, not Shawar. The Muslim leader. The uncle of Salahuddin. Shirku comes. All of a sudden, there's a stalemate again. They come to a truce. What's the truce? You leave. I leave. Who's still there? Shawar. Third time happens. Fourth time happens. Fifth time happens. Now the fifth time, Shirku plays it very smart. What does Shirku do? Shirku actually manages to defeat Amalric the first. Every time it's been a draw, it's been a truce. As soon as he defeats him, he sends Salahuddin along with part of his army to go and take Alexandria, which is on the western front, which is a big major city. As soon as that's taken,
of Egypt.
Almeric, he thinks, I've been played. I've been played. And now Shirku has control of just about all of Egypt. And as soon as all of Egypt, unfortunately what happens, Almeric also dies. Now, who's left? Shawar, Shirku, Salahuddin. So Shawar and Shirku have a very interesting banter. Basically, if you narrow it down, the banter goes something like this. Hey man, where you been? Says Shirku to Shawar. Shawar says, my friend, my Muslims, you're here to save me once again. Yes, we're here to save you. Come, let's join in the festivities. Are you sure you won't do anything to me? Because I kind of backstabbed you 4 times in a row. No, come. So Shirku lures Shawar away from his palace. And then there's an assassin waiting to kill him. Who's the assassin? Salahuddin. Guts him.
That's crazy.
So that's where he learns if an enemy's an enemy, doesn't matter if he's a Muslim. No Muslim ever betrays another Muslim in the back.
That's traitorship,
That's traitorship. And now Shirku passes away.
He was basically running Egypt for a while, but then he passes away.
Who's left? 25, 27-year-old Salahuddin Ayubbi. And on the other side is Nuruddin Zengi. Everything now comes under which dynasty? Effectively, Abbasid dynasty. This is where you were continuing.
And now we've sort of established this is his rulership starting, right? And he was young.
Sorry, I do want to point out that assassination of Shawar, historians do differ. Some people say it wasn't Salahuddin. Some Western historians do say it was Salahuddin. So I'll just put that out there as well before.
But he was assassinated.
He was definitely assassinated.
In history. We know that. Now, the future now holds a lot of intricacies in how Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi interacts with the Zengis and how they reciprocate it. Now, obviously, we know Nuruddin Zengi was someone who sort of brought that information to Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi how to run a state.
You know what was one of the greatest divisions that were set up by Nuruddin Zengi?
I'm curious.
The propaganda division.
A division meaning like a team or...
Like a ministry of propaganda.
Oh, wow.
It was one of the cleverest plays he'd ever done. He was a humble guy. He was a Muslim. He was a guy for the people. But he thought, how can I use that to my advantage? Because all of my other princes and sons and cousins and they're not like me. And he understood that. So he began to spread rumors. And true rumors. What were the rumors? Nuruddin is a humble guy. He sleeps in a tent. Nuruddin doesn't drink. And it began to spread. And Salahuddin had the front seat to all of this politics. He saw that, wait a second, if I do some, and this is why, especially in today's day and age, it's really interesting to make a note here that some of the old heads, you can say, why do you go on social media? Why do you create some stories? Why do you talk? Why do you distribute? Just stick to your prayer mat, man. Just pray to Allah. Nothing was ever done without some sort of I don't want to use the word scheme because that has a negative connotation, but certainly a way to present your Islam in a presentable way to others, to show your way of worship, your perspective, lay it down in a way that's possible for others to grasp, understand, and then act upon. So that's why it's so important that we're holding this podcast. There's many other Muslim podcasts. Listen to all of them. Grab what you can. Soak in the knowledge.
Yeah, and no way are we like patrons of this knowledge or someone who.
Oh no, astaghfirullah,
right?
astaghfirullah.
Like
no.
we're just gathering whatever information we know, and I'm sure
you can tell, baby. You can tell by the way I'm excited. Like I just love talking about this stuff. It's how did we get here?
Exactly.
It's so interesting. It's not, yeah. Like we think our Islam is tied to, Umar, Abu Bakr, Usman, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhum, and certainly it is. There's no doubt about it. But what happens to the Umayyads? What led to their downfall? What happened to the Abbasids? What led to their downfall? What happened to the Ayyubids? What led to their downfall? If we don't study this, we see some of the diseases that affected them affect us.
Yeah.
And now we don't, and rather than learn from history to see what the cure of those illnesses are, we're still allowing those illnesses to spread amongst your ummah today.
It's like we get so stuck up on the rise of Muslims in different times that we forget about the fall of Muslims in different times. Right?
Certainly.
But now we're talking about the rise.
Yeah.
Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah.
Rise after a fall.
Yep.
Jerusalem's fallen.
Jerusalem has fallen. See how it's in the hand of the Christians now.
I wanted to make a reference. I don't know if I should or if I can. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get in trouble. But anyways, it used to be Jerusalem for the Muslims at that time. Now it's Jerusalem for the Christians. So Jerusalem is no more Jerusalem. Maybe you guys can infer what I'm trying to say for the Muslims, like back in Salahuddin Ayubbi. And it's been that way for how many years now? Around 70 years.
Yep. It's been that for 70 years. But at the time, like Nuruddin Zangi, he didn't live to see much of what, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi accomplished after, right?
Yep. The demise of Nuruddin Zangi was really interesting too, by the way.
Yeah.
Have you ever read into it?
Light on it, actually?
Have you ever read into it?
I haven't read too much into it, no.
Have you, Ata?
No.
This guy's a warrior, elegant, what a man, like conquered everything, great Muslim. He dies from an abyss in his tonsils that ruptures. That's what historians say. Death, kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. When death comes, that's like it's such a humbling thing. Like a leader such as that met a death like that. And we'll get to Salahuddin al-Ayyubi's eventual passing as well, and we'll talk about what happened there.
Yeah, but about Nuruddin Zangi, before we move on to now Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, he also has a very interesting dream, right? Instances of dreams that lead to a famously recounted story of his, right? He once, subhanAllah, one night has a dream where he meets Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam warns him about a plot to what, right? To reach the body and the beloved body and harm the body of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Madinatul Munawwara. So now Sultan Nuruddin Zangi is very perplexed. He doesn't understand. Obviously, subhanAllah, he had a very beautiful dream. He wakes up, goes about his day. Second night, he has the same dream, and now he grows very concerned. Like, what's the dream about? Does nothing about it. The third night, he has the dream again, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now reprimands him for not doing any action on what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has informed him of.
Yep.
And at this point, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam shows him the face of the people that are trying to do this. Now, Sultan Nuruddin Zangi is so worried. He wakes up in a rush. He decides to take action. So he takes a small contingent, right? In a way that the people don't know he's gone, right? Because we're talking about a time period where your sultan disappears, people move armies, right? If your sultan's not there, or if your sultan passes away, people move in, armies move in, they take over cities, slaughter thousands of people.
That's it.
He moves and completes a 25-day journey to Madinatul Munawwara in 16 days.
Yeah.
day and night, just riding on horseback and going. But when he reaches Madinah al-Munawwara, he gets off his horseback and he starts walking.
Humility.
Right?
Going back to that.
Humility. Now, he was casted from a great mold. And now he is also casting a mold for greatness for Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, right? Now, he needs to find a way to find these men. He can't just go to every house, knock on the door and be like, let me look at your face. So he now informs the governor that, all right, we need to, let's hold a big festival of sorts, a big, I'm going to feed the people and call all the men of Madinah al-Munawwara. Sultan Nuruddin Zangi is now looking at the face of every man, inspecting it, but he can't find him. He says to the governor, are there any men missing from here? He says there's two, little elderly men, they visit Masjid al-Nabawi every day. They also Darvish type people. They give water at, the blessed graves of the companions. They're very nice men, but, they live nearby to Masjid al-Nabawi.
Yeah.
To the holy burial site, right? And so Nuruddin Zangi, he gets very concerned. So he rushes over with his soldiers. They knock on the door, they enter the house. He walks in. He walks over the rug. He notices it's a bit hollow.
Yeah.
Has the soldiers move it, and he finds a tunnel. Dug all the way, and they had reached, in different accounts of the story, the holy blessed feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these men reached that point. But subhanAllah, the timing, Hazrat Nuruddin Zangi reaching there and actioning on it and getting to the point that as he came into this Jalal, he asked them, who made you do this and why are you here? He says, the Christian rulers at the time ordered us to steal the body of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And upon anger in his jalad, he beheads them on the spot. Oh my gosh. And Sultan Nuruddin Zangi, in some accounts, goes and kisses the beloved feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in some accounts, and there's different accounts of this that they didn't even reach. And but the story is as such. The story is accounted for, by the way. That he then asked the governor that we will build this sort of trench around made of molten lead. Of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so no one can ever reach. SubhanAllah, that is some impact that lasts not just a couple of it's today, right? Like he built that molten lead trench around and acknowledges and is so grateful for the blessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to be chosen for this task.
One of the things about Nuruddin Zangi coming in, you mentioned this as well, humility certainly, but adab, getting off his horseback for Rasulullah, Salahuddin seeing this. That's why, and we'll get to this when he conquers Jerusalem and the leper king comes outside and he's like, why aren't you butchering the Christians? What does he say? I am not those men. I am Salahuddin.
Yeah.
Damn, what a line, man. What a line.
There's so many lines that you can take. Like I have a list of quotes that I just compiled from his book. Like there's just so many on unity, on humility. I fear none but God and I only care for his reward.
Yeah.
If you're a leader saying that, then where do you stand, right? Yeah. Like if you are a man who lived in Egypt at that time or lived anywhere there, you're looking at a ruler, a vizier who genuinely cared about people, genuinely cared about his people. And now I want to fast track a little bit this history. There was a lot of back and forth with the future generations of the Zangis, mainly because of external forces. Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, rahimahullah, attempted many times to collaborate and unify with them. But many times there were young heirs. There were young people who took over. They didn't have the right ear. They didn't have the right people to listen to. And because of that, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi eventually finally reclaimed Damascus, Aleppo, became the single ruler of Egypt, Damascus, Hijaz, and Yemen. And he was recognized by the empires and dynasties at that time by that. So now let's talk about, we're remembering him as a great hero in Islam, right?
Definitely, yeah.
In what ways do you think his achievements still resonate, with us today?
So it's all about his courage that he had, right? He had a lot of courage. As you can say, Salahuddin Ayubbi, continuing to resonate with the Muslims through his leadership, through his unity, through his mercy and moral. So that's what I expected from saying Salahuddin Ayubbi. He used, from his achievements, he really knew how to keep the Muslims and the Christians. He knew how to unify them. That was one of his main
and that
goals.
unifying is very important here, right? Because we're talking the conquest of Jerusalem happens in 1187, right? This is really important, right? Because we should probably talk about the events that lead up to the conquest. We'll get there in a second. But there was just compassion in everything he did in that sense, right? You narrated a famous line that we always seen in that movie as well, Something Heaven, I forgot the name of the movie, where they portray Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi. But there was compassion in how he dealt with the Christians and the Jews, right?
You want to know a story?
Go ahead.
About his compassion?
Do it.
Crusaders are happening. I don't know why my production team is in tatters over there in the back end. But anyways, the Crusades are happening. This is after the conquest of Jerusalem, by the way. So we're a little fast forwarding, but it's a really interesting story. And since you're highlighting compassion, a Christian woman who is participating in the Crusades breaks through the lines of Christians, breaks through the lines of Muslims, goes straight to the tent of Salahuddin, and she's in tears. And she comes in front of Salahuddin, tearful, crying. Salahuddin's like, "What's wrong? You're a Christian woman. What are you doing in the Muslim tent?" She's like, "Last night, your people came, your soldiers came. They raised our tents, and they took my daughter. I went to all of my generals. I went to all of the Crusader leaders. They said, we can't help you. There's one man who can. And that man who can help is Salahuddin Ayubbi." So she's like, "I got to meet him. So I'm here." Salahuddin's like, "What does she look like?" Describes, sends one of his ambassadors right there, PAs, whatever you want to call them, go to the marketplace where the slaves are now being sold, because she became a slave. Go. So he went. 2 hours later, this girl is on his shoulders, bringing her back. The woman sees, begins to cry, my daughter. Salahuddin, by the way, he cried a lot. He was an emotional man in terms of tears. It's close to Allah. Remember, tears only come to those with a soft heart. And soft heart today means weak. No. Soft heart means it's welcoming to Allah. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So he's weeping. His generals are weeping. Nothing happens. She leaves. That's the compassion of Salahuddin Ayubbi.
And
if this ever happened the other way around, the Muslims, the Crusade, based on their ferocity, would have probably been killed.
Yeah. And like the Crusades were a different game. Like it wasn't like any, there are Christian communities that also preach unity and peace, right?
Yeah,
like
of course.
We are unified with them today. And we say because we act on it, right?
At the same time, there are some Muslims who don't preach unity.
Right? And that's true. It's on both sides.
And we don't represent them, and they certainly don't represent us. But leading up to the Crusades,
yes,
Reginald, very interesting character, violent prince, cruel prince. He's in captivity by Nuruddin Zengi for 15 years. He's released. Eventually, there's Salahuddin is involved in this, but it's going to get way too much. I don't want to get into it.
Yeah.
He's released. What does he do? There's a truce now between Salahuddin, between the Muslims, between the Christians. He attacks a caravan of the Muslims, breaking the truce. And then he says, "Where is your Muhammad? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Call upon him to defend you." Catches the ear of... That's not the only thing he says. He says, "I can't wait to march to Mecca. I'm going to raise the Kaaba on the ground. Then I'm going to go to Medina. And I'm going to take out the body of your Nabi, your Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, bring it to Jerusalem, and ask money from the Muslims to pay homage, to pay visitorship to the body of Rasulullah, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam." Salahuddin takes a sword up to the sky. "O Allah, as long as there is strength in this body, this hand and this sword will slay Reginald." He says this. Anyways, the battle happens. If you want to touch upon the Battle of Hattin, one of the greatest victories of Islam since probably the Battle of Yarmouk that was won by Khalid ibn Walid. And hundreds of years ago.
He actually captured Christian relics in this, the true cross, they say. But he showed a lot of people say unexpected mercy in this battle, right? As well.
He certainly didn't show it to Reginald.
No. Well, that's a truce made between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he fulfilled. He offered water to parched Crusader prisoners, right?
But he didn't offer it to Reginald. Do you know that story? You want to tell that? Or Ata, do you know that story?
No, not sure if I know that story.
Do you want? So many of the kings, they're all given, and the king is given water.
Reginald de Chatillon.
Reginald de Chatillon. Yeah. He's the cruel king. He's captured as well. By the way, how do you get water that's easily available to all? Ice. Interesting fact here. How's the first? Do you know where sorbet and syrup comes from? The Arabic word sharbat. Sharbat is an Arabic word and Urdu word now. But what they did is what the Seljuks did is they had fruit and they would put it into ice and they would eat the fruit and keep it cold. Arabs came in. They're like, let's crush the fruit. And when they crushed the fruit, what did it become? It became juice. Sorbet. This now going down to Italy. Italians see it. What do the Italians say? Why don't we add some cream to it? Gelato. What do you get? Gelato. Some historian, I forgot his name.
You definitely went to a gelato spot in search.
No, I heard the story from a historian. It was, I think it was an Instagram or YouTube short. Very, very good. I forgot the historian's name, but perhaps one of the staff members they'll find and they'll add that clip. It's really interesting. But ice cream was made over 3 different civilizations. Anyway, side story. So this ice is brought up for one of the kings. It's given to the king. The king drinks it, and then he passes it to Reginald, the Chatillon. Reginald takes it, and he drinks it. Salahuddin immediately stands up, and he says, I didn't give you that water. I didn't give you that water. I didn't give you that water. Reginald's drinking. He's like, no, your majesty, you didn't give me that water. People are like, what's wrong with Salahuddin? He's like, because where I come from, where whoever I give water to is my guest. And I cannot harm my guest. You, Reginald, are not my guest. And then that's it. Promise fulfilled.
And these are like, we're talking about crusaders who outright slaughter Muslims. But to some of them, like after the war, Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi treated them as we are taught in Islam too. They become... So
after the Battle of Hattin, the Muslims go, they lay siege for a couple of days.
The conquest of Jerusalem then happened.
Which day was Jerusalem conquered finally?
1187.
Which day?
Ooh, I should have put this into my notes.
You guys, you're about to be blown away.
We need to know.
Day of Friday? 27th of Rajab. What else happened on 27th of Rajab? Somebody said Quran. No,
that's very
Quran happens all day.
I heard that in someone's ear.
What else? What happened on the 27th of Rajab?
The conquest of
No. Miraj. The Prophet went to Jerusalem on the 27th of Rajab. 100 years later, Salahuddin Ayubbi comes 27th of Rajab. Jum'ah. Conquers Jerusalem. Some of his emperors or his generals, they come, they say, what's that big church there?
Holy Sepulchre?
Yeah, they're like, let's raise it to the ground. Let's end the Crusades.
Just like that.
Yeah, they won't come. There's no church here. What is they going to do? Yeah. They come for the church.
Exactly.
Because that's where they think Isa alayhi salam is buried and all that.
Okay.
I've been there.
Oh, mashallah. I've never had the saadat of going, so I'm not sure. But inshallah, one day. Salahuddin Ayubbi says, why would I burn that? A man greater than I conquered Jerusalem, and he never raised it to the ground. Who was he referring to?
Hazrat Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Umar ibn al-Khattab. That's what he stood on. When this was done, Friday, Nuruddin Zingi, what he had done is he'd created a huge mimbar. This is going to go into Bayt al-Maqdis. Whenever it's conquered, it's brought in from Dimashq. It's placed. Salahuddin Ayubbi never wore new clothes.
And there's 2 of the ones he made, and one of them is to Masjid al-Aqsa.
Correct. And Salahuddin Ayubbi wears new clothes. He gets the best qaris all across the Abbasid dynasty, all the Muslim world. And Ibn Shabad, who's the biographer of Salahuddin Ayubbi, he says when all of the qaris on the different mimbars read Allahu Akbar, after 90 years of Christian rule, They said it felt like the Muslim soul was about to leave the ground. It felt like the earth was beginning to shake, and it felt like Allah was descending upon Bayt al-Maqdis.
Subhanallah.
Ibn Shabbad writes this. So imagine 90 years of suffering of the Muslims, and now once again, what is being read in Bayt al-Maqdis? The azan.
Subhanallah.
And then one of the
third holiest site in Islam.
And then one of the khatibs, they begin the khutbah. I don't think we have time to go into the khutbah. What a khutbah.
SubhanAllah.
What if you just search it up, the khutbah that's given by one of the ambassadors of Salahuddin Ayubbi. Oh my goodness. What a khutbah. Like, it's just referring to the Prophet ﷺ, how they are his slaves, how they conquered what they went to conquer, how they've liberated the Muslims, all for the sake of Allah and his Rasul. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
SubhanAllah. And this siege was like no other. He took it, granted safe passageway to the Christians. Everyone is given safe passageway.
That as you leave, the men are supposed to pay 10 dinars, the women are supposed to pay 5 dinars, the children are supposed to
personally contributed to the funds to people who couldn't pay.
Yeah, and many of them didn't end up paying. Wow. Just leave if you want to leave.
Like, out of his own pocket.
Yep.
And historians, like even his own accounts, you said Bahaduddin ibn Shaddad.
Yeah, Shaddad.
He even narrates that he never had more than 3 or 4 dirhams to his names. To his name, all he owned was spent on the poor, the needy, and those in the cause of Islam.
Yep.
This is like the ruler of the most richest of cities.
Syria, Egypt, Jerusalem,
Yemen,
Turkey, wherever, Yemen,
Hijaz,
Jordan.
Yeah, everywhere.
Makkah, Medina, wherever you look.
And he didn't have more than 3 or 4 dirhams
dirhams
in his pockets, because he gave it all to the poor and needy.
A few silvers, by the way, for those of you.
A few silvers, and I don't want to do any foreign exchange or whatever the rate is, because I feel like people would start a comment war on what it actually is. But like, there's so much to be learned, right? His philosophy of leadership and his philosophy and way of having humility and piety in his life. People, everything. His quotes, "A king does not lead his people through fear, but through justice and mercy." That's just on leadership, right? We started with how he wants people to remember him. I would rather be remembered for my humility and devotion to Islam than for my conquest and mercy and victories. Subhanallah.
Remember in the beginning of this podcast, we discussed there were 2 khalifas. What are their names?
2 khalifas of
one was in Abbasid dynasty, one is Fatimid. Khalifa.
Yeah.
A caliph. What are their names?
Oh.
Nobody really cares.
No.
Why? Salahuddin. He's there. Why do we need to care about these guys? Why? Because he didn't want his name shown up.
Nope.
All he wanted was the name of Islam.
And
when you raise the name of Islam, Allah inevitably raises your name in the process.
Subhanallah. There's so much mercy in his actions.
I think while wrapping it up, you want to speak a little bit about Richard the Lionheart?
Richard the Lionheart, there's some great stories you can probably discuss about.
Yeah.
He was involved in a couple of battles and specifically some duels as well.
Yep.
Upon hearing that his horse doesn't work, I said it doesn't work like a car. His horse is ill. He doesn't have a horse. Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi sent 2 horses for his duel.
Yep.
Imagine that's your main enemy in battle, and you're sending him horses that he can fight with.
This was when the Third Crusade happened with Richard the Lionheart coming in. This is when Salahuddin, I would say, probably faced the biggest disappointment in his life. You know why?
Why?
Because he sent letters to everyone in the Muslim world. Help Jerusalem. Help Masjid al-Aqsa. These guys are coming at us as waves upon waves upon waves. Where's my wave?
The Third
Where's
Crusade.
my help?
And he was a general who, quite frankly speaking, before maybe faced 1 or 2 defeats or stalemates, right?
Yep.
And this now, where the Third Crusade that we've entered, France, England, the Normandies, these are people coming down in armies. And Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi is holding them back, like pushing them.
He's like, for every one we kill, there's 60 that come up.
And they keep on pushing and pushing. And that sort of reminds you of today.
Yep.
Where we live in an era now where our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine are crying for help, right?
Wave upon wave, not of men now, of missiles
of missiles
being dropped on these poor Muslims, on these warriors, these custodians of Masjid al-Aqsa.
people who belong in the highest ranks of Jannah.
But there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
The difference was, Richard the Lionheart says, after a few months of this stalemate, of this constant bombardment, and Salahuddin, at one point, he looks to Allah and he says, "Oh Allah, all of my resources are done. I have done everything I can to protect Bayt al-Maqdis. Oh Allah, now I turn to you." The next day, Richard the Lionheart sends a treaty for truce.
Yeah, Treaty of Jaffa. And you know what it says written? And he makes a very interesting declaration. He says, "O Christians, Jerusalem can never be conquered as long as Muslims have a man like Salahuddin in their midst." That's a legacy. And the Muslims kept it. And on top of that, he allowed and said by stipulation, the Christians can do pilgrimage. And that was peace.
And Salahuddin allowed the Jewish people to
as well.
coexist there with the Muslims. And Alhamdulillah, since then, 1186?
Yeah.
Until 1948.
Yeah. Muslims
It
lived
was
in unity.
Muslims, Christians, Jews, they all lived in unity. And for a couple of years after 1948, in unity. But what's happening there now, I would say, is even more barbaric than what happened before Salahuddin took over Jerusalem.
The slaughter.
There is no way to... I don't understand how you defend genocide.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give our dear brothers and sisters protection and the highest of ranks in Jannatul Firdaus.
You know what the poets say? They go to the graves of Salahuddin and they say, "Qum Salahuddin, qum." Stand, Salahuddin, stand. There's a poet there, he writes, he says, "How many more times are you going to whip the back of Salahuddin for the same mistakes that you all are doing today? How many more times are you going to hold accountable Salahuddin for the mistakes of the ummah today?" Salahuddin isn't going to come out of his grave. We have to be the individuals who unify the ummah.
And that's sort of, I think, why we chose this is an example of a man who was not part of the Khulafa Rashidin, but a man who lived and saw traitorship, who saw tyranny, who saw anarchy, who saw betrayal at every footstep and door.
But he looked beyond it.
And he looked towards the path of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
He looked beyond the individual faults of everyone and united them on the name of Allah.
Wow.
And how did he pass away? There's some Hajis leaving after Hajj. He went to visit them. It's raining. He gets sick. And he becomes sicker. He's sleeping on the bed. One of the Qaris, he's reciting the Quran. And what is he reciting? Huwallahu alladhi. And he's unconscious. Like he's in and out of consciousness. Huwallahu alladhi la ilaha illahu alimul ghaybi wa shahada. All of a sudden, Sahih. That is correct. Some say this is when he passed away. Others say, I forget the ayah, I've written it down, that the Qari was reading Surah. What a way. I mean, both ways. What a way. But anyways, the Qari, he goes, فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَقُلْ حَسْبِيَ اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ وَهُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ. But if they turn away, then say, "O Prophet, Allah is sufficient for me, and there is no God worthy of worship except for Him. So in Him I put my trust." Salahuddin recites Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. At what age? 52 to 55.
Wow.
He passes away. In 55 years, he became the leader of the known world, conquered Jerusalem, and left a legacy that will remain until the day of judgment. Until now, until the day of judgment, inshallah.
A loving man of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. His family,
undoubtedly,
in his family, his own, it's narrated by Ibn Kathir, in that his own family used to celebrate the birth of Rasulullah. Mawlid.
I didn't know that. I didn't.
Wait for
Mashallah.
it. His own brother-in-law, his beloved, he was very dear to him, Sultan Salahuddin Malik, and everyone can look this up. There's sources for this. He used to feed 5,000 goats to people, 100,000 dishes of sweets, 30,000 trays of food, and from Fajr to Asr used to do gatherings on the Mawlid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On top of that, the people who conquered Jerusalem with him were the people who used to sit in the madrasa of Sheikh Abdullah Al-Qadri Jilani radiyallahu anhu. And the own advisor of Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi, Salahuddin Ayubbi rahimullah, was the student and Khalifa of Sheikh Abdul Qadri Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Ibn Qudama. Anyone can look this up. These are sources of our history. And these are people who felt the dear connection to Allah Almighty through loving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine today, no matter what time it is of the year, in Ramadan, they sit at night and read Taraweeh. That is the last focus of anyone nowadays.
You've seen the
videos today. After Taraweeh, they sit, they remember Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they remember Allah Almighty. They sit in loving Allah Almighty. They sit in loving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They read halakah, they do durood, they do zikr, they do nasheed. They are living their day to day thinking that a missile might drop at them at any second.
It's called tawakkul, man. It's called tawakkul.
But they remember Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam every walking step. This is belief in the unseen.
MashaAllah.
This is belief in the unseen, and may we all be guided to a path where we can learn from the leaders, our ancestors, such as Sultan Salahuddin Ayubbi radiyallahu anhu, a man whose name is the righteousness of religion, of Islam, of our deen. May we all learn from this. May we all take it to example what the true heart of a hero is and how we can action it into our own lives. We pray for our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza and our dear brothers and sisters around the world who are going through atrocities, and we pray that Allah Almighty gives us the strength as Muslims to unify and give them help. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Thank you so much, guys. Inshallah, catch you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.